So here we are, all getting together for another DACathon 2021 session, and really kind of diving into some of the governance aspects and some of the frameworks that some of the projects around the ecosystem have implemented. And today we have some special guests of Saro and Michael from Alien Worlds, who've really taken the whole DAC idea and really helped kind of culture it from the very beginning and years ago, and have really adapted it into some of the gameplay and even gamified it in their Alien Worlds platform. So wanted to kind of bring them on, have some chats about it. Here's some of the details from the minds of those that made it happen, and just kind of take some questions and collaborate. So welcome, guys and gals, and glad to have y'all here.
Hi, guys.
Hello, thank you for having us.
Yeah,
It's so nice to see everybody, our DAC community of wayward techies and governance geeks.
yeah, and like I say, to kind of collaborate together. It's always awesome to hear, as you start to bounce, conversations back and forth, some of those little nuggets of wisdom about how you did, why you did, how things came to be the way they are. Like I say, we were learning earlier about, why does Yates like DAC so much, and didn't even have the idea about the progression of, that kind of drove what his passion in DACs and stuff were. So I don't know. I guess we can kind of start digging into that. I don't know if you want to kind of overview some of the governance plans. I know it's about to go live here in the game for Alien Worlds, and just kind of the general governance. I don't know, gamification of governance. Maybe that's a good topic.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
Start with Michael because he's the
Well, I
beginning
mean,
of the ideas.
what we've created is just a framework for governance, really. We haven't actually created the governance itself. We've just said, okay, these are the basic rules, really basic rules of how things can work. But the actual day-to-day running and how the planets are run is entirely up to the people who are voted in. So I see that we've done the easy part of it, really. The hard part is going to have to come from the community people who get elected, and they're going to have to keep their positions somehow.
Yeah, like I say, it's kind of interesting that, I don't know, you gave the framework for, the ability. I guess you talked about it's a representative type of, DAC where, certain token holders can elect the representatives, and then the representatives have the ability with a quorum to, make decisions related to many of the technical framework aspects. Obviously the trillium allocation, there's some funds that can technically be controlled and not manipulated, but distributed as needed. But then also, I believe even at the smart contract level, once some of that governance fully kicks in, the DACs and the governance will even have control at a pretty intense level of some of the code that drives token distribution, or even I heard you mention, voting weights and stuff like that, if that's the decision that's made down the road.
Yeah. So should we just have a recap of how it works? So the way it works is representative democracy. So anyone who stakes their trillium will receive the planet token, which you probably have already. If you look in your Blocks wallet, you'll see that you have like a KAV or a MAG or a EYE token. Those are all the governance tokens. Each one of those is one vote, and you can vote for 2 people within a council. 5 people are eventually elected, and from those 5 people, 3 of them are required to make a decision. So the threshold is 3 out of 5. That's it, really. And then those 3 out of 5 control the actual planet account, which is an account on chain. So it's, anything a normal account can do, this account can do, which includes spending the tokens, creating other accounts, installing smart contracts, this one account can then control other accounts via the permission system on EOS, or on WAX rather. So yeah, again, it's reasonably simple, but actually it allows a lot of flexibility for what people can do within that. And then in terms of the DAC software itself, they can't change the core DAC software, which is what we control as the federation, but they can extend it. There are some configurations which allow you to extend the contracts which are used for various features. And one of those is the vote counting. So you can actually install a contract, change the configuration, and let it count votes in an entirely different way. So you could have NFT voting, or you could have voting only for people who are allowed to vote. You know, you could have that kind of voting system. Anything you like really once it's installed, but there's no documentation for how to do that. So you're going to have to read some code and figure it out. And I think that's the fun part, that I don't think we want people doing that immediately. I think let's take it one step at a time and just have the basic stuff running, and then we'll allow people to do.
You know the way computer nerds work. Once you open Pandora's box, there's going to be some code monkeys that start smashing on it. So.
Yeah, it's going to be cool to watch how people kind of like cotton onto these abilities and then use them or don't use them. I mean, I may well run for one of the planets. We're considering it. There's no rules against members of the Federation from running for Planet Council. And yeah, it's definitely something that I may or may not do.
Fair enough. I think David had a question. Do you have something on that?
Yeah, so it sounds like the quorum is not hard coded, right? Because I have some framework in mind that I want to try out, and it is different than a 3-5 quorum. So I'm interested in how does this play out? Can this be like a different super, like is it hardwired, this 3-5 quorum?
No, 3 and 5 are both parameters which can be set by the DAO itself. So if you want to change the 3 or the 5, you can do that quite easily. And there's actually 3 different levels as well. So there's low, medium, and high permissions, which are coded by default. So you can use those to allow different functions based on different thresholds.
Yeah, we've actually found in DACs that goes a long way from trying to herd the cats, as we refer to. You know, I mean, some of the things need the major super majority, and some are just, look, don't let one person do it, but don't make all 21 sign in and do it. You know, it's hard to grind the gears when you're always herding the cats just for any minor sort of administration. So,
and even other changes, I think we would be happy to make to the core contracts if that's what's needed. You know, if one of the planets came to us and said, we've got this great idea, we want to modify the governance slightly, and these are what we want to do, then we would definitely listen to that and even make changes to the core contracts within reason. Yeah.
And hey, great news, when you deploy those contract changes, it won't cost you $1,000 every time you deploy it, right?
It literally costs $1,000. We deployed some contracts recently.
That's what I remember. I don't remember whether he spewed some 4 letters or not, but I was chatting with Yates and he was like, damn, I made a mistake and I got to re-upload it, you know, like 1 line or 1 character or something. It was like $1,000 every time he found the bug.
It's expensive to make a mistake on Ethereum, true.
So one of the benefits, like I say, of the EOS.io technology and WAX, you know, in particular, is that, you know, we don't have to pay per transaction or contract update nearly in the same raw drag you over the coals aspect. But
yeah, definitely.
And yeah, so it sounds like you're using, you know, like a lot of the DAC structures are that you've made, you're using that built-in permission structure of EOS.io, so it naturally allows the chain itself to do well, this group can do it, that group can't, as opposed to having to really write the raw code and everything around.
Yeah, it's a security thing as well. If you allow a different layer to take care of the core security, any bugs in our code wouldn't affect that kind of level of authentication. So, yeah.
Yeah.
It's good to use many layers in your code, just in case.
It is. Well, talking about security, one of the big things, and I guess everybody on the call, don't forget to go and enable two-factor authentications on your Wax Cloud wallets, because I think that's a thing that I guess somebody's database got ripped into and passwords exposed. And I think that they've been saying that a lot of people have had their accounts. They're just, guessing passwords and trying to break in. And of course, if they get in, they just, once they have access to your account, they can do what they want with it. So
you're going back. Yeah, I think it was a previous password database leak that
correct.
Someone has just started abusing on Wax and just trying, and it seems like they're having a lot of luck. So yeah, if you enable two-factor authentication, it's a little bit more hassle, but you're going to be safe.
Yeah, it makes it painful when you go to do those pack purchases all at one time, and you go and you click OK, and it's like, oh yeah, I need to re-authenticate. Oh, I need you to fumble for your code. No, they're all sold out.
Yeah, it's a little bit time-consuming, but
not that I've had that happen recently or anything. So
you will sell packs again.
I don't know. I've got to stop buying Alien Worlds and all these other NFTs. I am amassing way more than I am emitting. So there has to be a threshold. No, give me a break. Give me a break. So yeah, I think talking about that, y'all had a legendary pack planned, but y'all had kind of pulled some of that back to kind of help with the game mechanics and card economy. So yeah, I guess there may be some future packs that are already kind of out there, and then obviously some down the road y'all may decide to reoffer some.
Yeah, there's that pack, and I think like as we partner with other systems, there will be IP and other kinds of packs that hopefully we can offer into the metaverse. So yes, I think we're just at the beginning of NFTs really within Alien World. So
yeah, I was Sunday night is our family dinner night, and so I was over talking to my older generation, and was like, hey, by the way, you're about to start seeing a lot of news showing up, about NFTs. And, I was kind of explaining, because they understand, a little bit of crypto, because that's what I do, but not obviously nerd wise. But I was trying to kind of prep them for, you're about to see some crazy news coming out about NFTs and these, whatever. And she's like, oh, are you talking about digital art? Oh yeah, we've got that coming out. And, I'm like, yes, that's a thing, and it's starting to take off. But yeah, NFTs they're all the buzzword. And I mean, a lot of things Alien World taps into. So you got the NFTs, you got the governance, you got the play to earn type of thing, not have to pay to play, get your shovel, get at it, right?
Free shovels.
Your free shovel, correct. Get free shovel and free human, right? Speaking of which, I think I saw there's 100,000 of those abundant cards of most of the different abundant flavors out there. So it's amazing how many cards and how much interaction, because not everybody gets an NFT every mine, right? So I mean, just on the randomness of assigning all those out.
Yeah, there's been a lot of mining just since the 22nd of December when we started.
There is.
And
a
it
lot
does
more
just
now
pile
than
up.
then.
And now, those are all kind of ingredients that are out there. So that's kind of, I guess, part of the game balancing, or the sort of progression of the narrative, is that there's lots of things that those can get used for. I mean, both from our side as the Federation, but also your side, as planets and users. I know you've already been burning NFTs in the volcano. So yeah, there's plenty that can be done with them once they're in the mix. the sort of rationale can kind of follow sometimes. We don't always know exactly what we're doing at the start, but we do at some point.
Well, that's kind of the coolness of it. I mean, you're just providing the framework of your game, you know, some creative, you know, Robin is lore, and, you know, I mean, you're kind of putting it out there as the beginning, but then, you know, that's one of the benefits about you to everybody is about blockchain gaming and this, that, and the other, is that, you know, it's one meshed ecosystem naturally, right? So other games can take your, you know, your assets and incorporate them into their game, which they have. You know, and even layer 3, you know, fanboys or whatever, all that information is straight up there on the chain, and assets that are, you know, freely owned. So therefore the world is your oyster. You guys don't have to manage it, and also, you know, get to benefit from let the world build itself, you know, and just have you guys kind of speckling in, and Yates reprogramming the contracts whenever somebody wants to do something outside of the original.
Yeah, we just pay the RAM for it all. So
yeah. Well, so I don't even want to know how much all these, talking about these hundreds of thousands of cards and all that you're, how much RAM on chain is that all eating up?
it's actually pretty good. I mean, it's a lot of kilobytes, but in terms of actual cost, it's pretty reasonable. We're looking at 450 megabytes now for one of the contracts, which is the one that's issuing all of the abundant stuff via mining. So that's all right. When we get to a gigabyte, then that's kind of impressive level.
Fair enough, fair enough. And just to fill some of you maybe non-EOSIO nerds in on it is, so, you know, there's several pieces to the blockchain of, you know, how it all works. And you've seen CPU and RAM and net and all this, but ultimately what we refer to as RAM in the EOSIO world is kind of, those are the things that are stored immutably on the chain. So not like the images of the cards, but like that's really where things, you know, kind of, that's where you add your data for it to always exist on chain. Well, obviously for every card that gets created, that gets stored on the chain, you know, in its respective ones and zeros. So for every card that actually gets minted and sent out, there's a little bit of the chain, you know, that is now reserved for maintaining the information about that NFT. So we were joking about one of the inadvertent side effects of the sacrificial volcano, because, you know, I was like, hey, we got all these cards, what do we do with it? We'll line it up, do a lottery, things like that. And Yates was like, well, actually, you know, there is a net benefit of every card you burn, we get this little sliver of RAM back. So
yeah, if you burn more cards, we actually benefit.
Yeah, so that, well, and like I say, other mechanisms kicked in that NFT holders decided that that's what they would rather use their cards for. So there hasn't actually been a lot of the sacrifice things of the volcano, that kind of mini game, although maybe we can ramp it back up, because I think they
the more you burn, the better for us, definitely.
Yeah, that's what I say. So yeah, I want to say everybody burn your cards, but no, don't burn your cards unless you know what you're doing. Because when we say burn, it is truly destroying that digital asset from the chain. So sometimes a good thing, sometimes a bad thing.
Yeah, and actually this is one of the differences between the simple assets and the atomic assets. With simple assets, the user pays, and it's not always clear who exactly pays and when you pay. Like, for example, if you transfer a token, you know, the normal tokens, if you transfer that to another person, you then pay for the RAM for that other person. So it's not very clear as to who is paying for the RAM, whereas with atomic assets, it's always us, which is, it's great for the user. I think it makes it very much more seamless for people to own all these assets. Like, we couldn't be printing all these abundance if we expected people to start paying RAM to send them around. And I think even during like GPK times, for the first GPK series, there was a lot of people running out of RAM when they were transferring them, and just generally having issues, and it's good that we can avoid those problems because it just makes it a little bit easier for everyone to be onboarded.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we're talking about governance here, so we can.
Yeah, let's stop talking about techie stuff.
That's all I'm about to say. I want to keep going on all the technical stuff, but yeah, like I say, I guess we need to kind of refocus back on the governance side. So I got a question I'm curious about is, from the DAC software side of things, one of the things we're starting to see is not so much token driven, voting weight ownership, but, maybe an NFT, is that related. It doesn't actually have to be a token. It doesn't have to be any of that, but just straight up the issuing and ownership of A to A and NFT, or even a tiered system. So I don't know if y'all have talked to anybody about that or seen that. Is it maybe it's already built in? It's just a feature that flip a 1 to a 0.
It's not something that's built in. I definitely think that somebody will eventually do it. I thought even Lisa was talking about having a DAC where you can vote with the gray peacemakers. So the more gray peacemakers you have, the better. It's definitely going to happen. We're going to have some sort of NFT infused voting. And it's possible technically as well. So it's just going to take somebody to come up with a good plan that's not immediately gameable and that works. And that makes sense as well, because you could use gray peacemakers, but then you kind of ask the question, why are you using them instead of just the default token? Yeah, you could have peacemakers, and you could even have it so that in the Thunderdome, the more wins you have in the Thunderdome, the more votes you get in that particular planet DAO. That would be quite interesting and cool to work. And that's one of the things which is extendable via the DAC software. So
you mentioned one thing is that, and I'm curious on where your brain was going with that, is that, so you talk about, using the peacemakers versus just using a token aspect. Why would you suggest, Lisa, maybe use tokens versus say an NFT or even another project's NFT? Is there benefit? I don't know. I'm just curious where that came from.
Well, we already use fungible tokens now for the voting.
Correct. So just the framework that it's already there as opposed to having to rewrite something new.
Yeah, I've heard people talking about NFTs for voting as well, and I think it's definitely interesting, and I don't think it's definitely something somebody's going to explore, but I think it just needs a bit of thought going into it as to why you need the NFT versus just a standard fungible token. And yeah, it could well be that the winners of Thunderdome get more votes than losers of Thunderdome. And if you put your guys into battle, you may well increase your vote weight. And yeah, I think we need to have a lot of imagination in this game. That's where it is. That's where the winners are going to be, as the ones who have the most imagination. Because it's going to be very easy to govern and just say, look, come vote for me. I'll pay my trillion to you via the reward mechanism. That's very easy to do. It doesn't require any time from anyone. Everyone loves it. But yeah, I don't think that's going to be the thing that wins out. I think the thing that wins out is going to be the people who have the imagination to do something that's a little bit more advanced.
And for the first round, sounds like it's opening up fairly soon for putting your hat in a ring to be part of a planet's council. Mm-hmm. And 5 people per council per planet, and then people at the end of kind of the elections, you'll be able to vote for 2 people. And is that going to be based on the amount of, say, if you're in Magar, is that based on how much Magar you have staked, or is it going to be 1 person, 1 vote?
It'll be the amount of Magar token that you own. Yeah, so it's right. Stake weighted.
Perfect. So yeah, so then what's the most exciting to me is hearing that, it's, you can change that, so 5 people get voted into Magar, and you can say, hey, we just offered a membership card to everyone that did vote, and we want to change the voting, and now everyone that has one of those cards for the next election gets 1 member, 1 vote, just for example, just to give some examples of how that council can change it up. And then David has some real world experience excuse me, likewise with us on voting and getting people to vote, because it sounds all exciting, but you want people to be active. So how are you going to pull out those people? And then how do you actually get your main council is maybe one other thought for people to consider. You're going to have maybe 5 different people that aren't part of a consortium. Maybe they might be just 5 independent people that voted, but how you organize and get together. We've had difficulties in the past where we've had bigger councils or bigger groups or bigger DACs, and some of those people aren't as active. So just to get them to push through proposals, right? So just maybe to give people an idea of thinking about, sure, you want to get voted in, but when then you are voted in, how are you going to entice each other to actually pass things, right? So you don't want a stagnant planet where you have 5 people that can't get anything done. And I'm sure you'll see then the people leave for other planets. So it's this really neat dynamic of enticing, the stakers of the planet, the miners, and then all these other different fractals. So people that are going off to the off to fights. So yeah, it's just really exciting to see how you've really made the base layer and going to allow the community to decide how that all plays out. Is just the greatest experiment ever.
Yeah,
I want to talk about
that's why we've gone with 5.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, that's why we went with 5, because it's a nice low number that we think that people can group in a group of 5 quite easily, and they can probably hopefully come to an agreement. We shouldn't get the stagnation that would happen.
Makes sense. Well, like I say, excited to see kind of how that social dynamic plays into the games, because you'll have some that'll be, as I call the kumbaya DACs, which are all hey, everybody's happy, we're all peacemakers and whatever, and then you might have those that are a little more direct and behind the scenes type of things. We'll see how that all kind of works out and plays in, and where people gravitate. I mean, you're already starting to see projects being able to influence pretty dramatically the flow of attention and staking if they wanted to. So I'm curious to see how creative people decide to get with some of that.
And I think the most interesting one is going to be the planets that are least staked at the moment. So the Veles, the Ike, and I think Naron as well is a little bit far behind. So I think it's going to be interesting when people realize that actually those ones are quite easy to take over, and they may well be targets in the future, like Neri was for the monkeys.
I'm sure that fact is not lost on people. I hear there's some great stats, the stats shite that shows them what all's going on with things.
I've heard that too.
How about this? I don't want to say it's a great site. Let me retract that.
I think one of the things that's really nice is that many of these elements are self-regulating. So, for example, although it can be configured what the voting mechanism is, it's still the case that it's the stake to the planet that is what calculates the trillium that accrues into that planet. So, I mean, you could decouple those 2 factors, right? So you could say, for example, the NFTs that are the basis of voting or something else, but then what you're doing is you're not necessarily incentivizing people to stake their trillium to the planet, which is always what will calculate the reward. So I think that, and that also speaks, I guess, to why stake weighted voting is the default parameter, and it's because it's what it's when people have put that kind of, when people have enlarged the system to the extent that then it's attracting more trillium, they've also invested in it, and hopefully they would be the type of voter who is checking who the custodians are and what they're voting on, etc. So I think one of the things that David is thinking about a lot is what happens when you get large participants who for some reason aren't very interested, right? Which, so as in people who have for whatever reason been able to express a lot of voting power, but then kind of like wander off, so that they have stake, but they don't really, they're not using that in any beneficial way. Now, you would assume that the system would correct for that, right? You would assume that somebody wouldn't normally do that, because if someone's invested a lot of money into a system, you'd think that they were actually going to be checking up on whether the custodians were passing multi-sigs and so on. Now, history does tell us that, especially in crypto, sometimes people's attention can kind of go to one thing when it's fashionable, and then then their attention goes elsewhere. Now, this is also then a function of the price, right, of the token, right? Because when there's a lot of attention in a project, you won't get things like static councils, probably, right? Because there'll be, but if for whatever reason the system changes, you could end up with static councils, and then they become, and then you'd imagine that that planet would become a takeover target. So I think many of these dynamics are naturally self-regulating, but where they're not, there's the possibility to decouple whatever element hasn't resulted in the kind of regulation that you would otherwise anticipate based on the fundamental architecture, and then try and correct for it. But that in itself might have unintended consequences, right? Every single design feature and every change of the design feature is going to have both intended and unintended consequences. And I think this whole metaverse is, as Michael initially started to point out, and I think it was one of the great insights of what we're building, is that it's a simulated economy. And in that, we're building a bunch of mechanisms that all have to do with each other, but we don't always know exactly how they have to do with each other. And you can vary certain of them and then see what happens. And then the human element is overlaid on top of that, which then just is what creates the kind of the chaos that I'm sure is going to end up ensuing.
Yeah, excited.
Maybe David could tell us about some of the investigations you want to.
I would like to. So the system I tried out with offline groups, it would like if someone breaks a leg, right, and he can't show up, and so he will not show up. So it will not be a problem, because there will be a meeting, and everyone there will be everyone there, and there will be a minimum quorum that needs to be reached. And if we can't reach that, there cannot be the decision would need to be postponed. But it will be like, it's all dynamic, right? We can use the voting process to vote on every parameter. We can vote in a dictatorship if we all agree that for this particular problem, it would be the most efficient. So we can vote in whatever we want, right? So we can deal with that with any situation, and we would use fast iterations and fast feedback, and to always encourage a safe space to give feedback, and to use a space where everyone can veto everything all the time, but they would need to offer an alternative that is viable. So they would not. So it is absolutely not encouraged in this process to block and to paralyze the council, but the council process in itself is incentivizing like a kind of synergistic spiral towards the common goal. And if someone is identified as a continuous disruptor, everyone will just be incentivized to vote him out and to offer him the opportunity to either change his behavior or he will just be excluded. So that's kind of the basic thing that I have found very useful in offline things. And I'm racking my head here to think about how can this be, like how can it be like with all the token and like having an NFT for a role or whatever. Like there's so many possibilities that would be like will be experimental. Like I thought about, like, for example, like, there can be a circle for a planet, or there can be like circles for a land plot, right? Because there's some circles for multi-plot owners. There are groups that own multiple land plots. They can form like sub-councils, and they send representatives to the planetary council. And what I would like to do is offer kind of a meta structure that just works, but leaves a lot of room, and it leaves the participants free to use the process to vote in their own stuff that works for them. But yeah, I would need to propose stuff and try it out and see how that works.
And then unfortunately, voters are completely irrational. That's the other thing, or at least they're, you know, they have a rationality that must be internally consistent, but might not always be what you would expect. I mean, that's what we found with the DAC, at least, was just, I mean, there was a group of voters there that was certainly, I'm sure, rational to them, but from our perspective, it was causing us not to be able to progress with things that were value adding to the DAC as a whole. So that's a really tough one when you have, especially if they're well balanced weights within the system that have opposing perspectives. That's, I think, you can have stasis of two kinds. You can have a kind of stalemate where you have two relatively equal sized factions that just have an opposing view, and for whatever reason, neither party is prepared to move elsewhere. Or you can just have disinterested parties. And that's another way that you can get kind of the system just not really functioning. I mean, I do personally think that the DAO-DAC mechanism is self-regulating eventually. I mean, that is actually what we found with the DAC, was we were able eventually to acquire enough tokens to achieve a majority for the perspective of kind of development and DAC development that we had. But it will be interesting to see how it evolves here, because there's a competitive dynamic between the DAOs. So that's the first, I mean, that's really the thing that Alien Worlds has done for the first time, is to put DAOs in competition with one single scarce resource. Correct. Tracking that.
The gamification almost of it is kind of, as I call that, is that it's not just these individual DACs, it's multiple, and you choose which DAC you or you know, planet DAC, whatever that you know is maybe closest in line with you. So yeah, it's the first direct competition, I guess, is a good way of saying it. Friendly competition, but that's unique. Yeah.
Yeah, and in that sense, I guess it's a simulation of the world, because in the real world, we are all competing for certain scarce resources, we think, at least. I mean, who knows if that's, I guess the pie gets bigger sometimes, but in certain marketplaces, it certainly feels like you're competing for something scarce. So yeah, that's what's happening here. And because in virtue of the competition as well, you get this collaboration, because, you know, an individual person alone can't probably compete with the whole metaverse, but together factions can. So that's a really interesting simulation again of how groups of people can get things done.
Well, I'm even thinking, you know, I mean, you've got, because it's not just like the planetary governance faction, so to say. I mean, you've got people that are involved with the game and carry a lot of weight, but probably aren't really even directly involved with the governance, other than the fact that, you know, look, don't screw it up, right? Don't run off all the miners or whatever. But, you know, and I don't know the plans of the different factions, you know, monkeys or ultra or any of those, but you'll start to see those partnerships and collaborations and solicitations, I think, even is, you know, look, you may not want to deal with it, but let us be on the same side, and you throw our weight, you know, or your weight. So I'm curious to see kind of how some of that develops.
Yeah, and then all that,
you know,
all that has to happen is somebody sells their tokens, their Trillium, and somebody else buys them, and then all of a sudden those parameters have changed, you know. And if it was a sizable sale and purchase, then you could have a really different landscape all of a sudden.
Correct. Well, now, like I say, even I've been amazed at how, I don't want to say popular or, you know, impactful some of these, you know, projects, which really, I mean, all they're trying to do is, you know, integrate with the platform and, you know, increase their exposure. And we were talking about earlier this morning, using it even as a drop mechanism for getting their information out. But, you know, they're not as, so to say, concerned about, you know, the governance sides of it, but they are greatly impacting it, you know, just because they can carry a following. So yeah, I'm curious to see, is this, you know, it's awesome to see these people using the framework for, collaboration and whatnot, but how is that going to play into the governance? Because you've got your big boys that, hey, if you'll jump in with us, maybe there's some sort of partnership or something. So I'm curious to see how that kind of develops, even more so than just the David saying, hey, I got these great ideas, let's see if we can put it in place. Yes, you're hired.
Yeah. Well, there will be
Well,
many
so-
marketplaces, I guess, is what you're really saying, right? Is that there will be many marketplaces that emerge for different types of things, different kinds of contributions, and they can then be traded across DAOs and so on.
Correct.
I mean, I don't
really
mean
like
an actual
to-
marketplace, but just a
That's
trading
all
of
that
stores
was like a
within. Yeah.
marketplace, like an atomic hub. No.
Not necessarily.
It forms it's almost an economic, I don't know, a piece of it is where,
Yeah.
not that you buy votes, but you partner,
Sure.
and maybe
And I
buy
mean,
them too. I'm not against
and
that.
maybe that becomes an NFT in itself, some kind of like cross. You could have a peace treaty, for example, between two of the planet DAOs, and that becomes an NFT. And then you trade that between the different DAOs, and that's like a non-aggression pact. But then with another one, you have it's open season for warfare.
I don't know which groups would attract those types of treaties.
So, I mean, I would really see this whole buying of votes ability as a huge attack vector, that it would be my first priority to make it impossible to buy a planet. That would be my first thing. And second would be in identifying all stakeholders and bring them to the table on equal footing. And I would try to adapt the underlying framework to that. Like I would see, like I would find the landowners, I would find the miners, and whatever other stakeholders they are. But this, like, you can just come in here, drop a bunch of money and buy a planet. That would be my first goal, and I would clearly communicate that to everyone who is interested in voting in the council, because I see this as a huge problem, which, yeah, I mean.
So I'm curious. I mean, it's a huge problem we run into on all of our depots, or even any of those types of governance. But with token weighted voting, I'm curious, because we run into this on all the different chains. What are some of your ideas about being able to prevent that? Because is that not essentially what's kind of going on right now? And not in a bad way, but like Crypto Monkey said, if you'll stake, we'll give you cards. I mean, is that not buying support? Again, not in a bad way, but
it doesn't work as long as you're on an anonymous, trustless interaction. Then you will not be able to escape this attack vector, because like there's nothing else, right? So I'm looking to find a way to abstract upwards from that, to see that as kind of the physical layer in networks, right? And to abstract upward to find some kind of application layer where there's actual interchange on personal, and then to translate down onto these frameworks that exist, like blockchain and tokens and whatever, I don't know, and NFTs, like that's not, I don't know, right? But I know what works between people, and I would need to find ways to translate that down. And I think in that way, it can be, that can be like prevented, or like hugely, the impact can be minimized so much that it becomes cost inefficient, right, to do this. Like we think with bot attacks, the strategy is not to get rid of all bots, but just to make it inefficient for them.
Yeah, I'm curious as to like I mean, I think there will always be a mechanism for projects to be able to incentivize people to do things, even if it's not, because like even right now, there are people that are running 0 commission or 1% commission lands and firing out rewards, which means there's pretty much no way that they can be gaining financially, I guess, from the raw economic aspect of it. But I mean, they obviously look at it as exposure and marketing and things along that line. So I'm curious as to, I think that'll always probably be there.
I don't think it's a bad thing for it to be there, right? Because isn't that how, I mean, most people are attracted into a system in order both to sort of contribute and extract value from it, and that's just natural. Now, it's not to say all participants are motivated by those considerations, and I think it's nice if there can be mechanisms that allow for other ways of engaging, for sure. Because it's actually in the diversity of engagement models that you get depth of value creation and also longevity, for example, that kind of outlives cycles and things like that. So I definitely think it's important for there to be like people who are more financially motivated, people who are more community motivated, people who are more perhaps motivated because of some external project that they have that they're trying to use this to promote or whatever. I think all of that's good stuff. But I think that I would say that it's unlikely that the system as a whole will stop being constructed in such a way as to reward value being staked into it. And I would actually personally say that I'm glad that I would say that that's unlikely, because I think then you get corruption. Because basically what it is, the way that I see this is that it would be really nice if none of us had a value imperative, but like we're human beings who need to eat kind of thing. So I think that is hardwired into our nature to a large extent. And so, so when you try and write that out of the system, it just comes back covertly, right? And then, so you don't get rid of things like vote buying or whatever. You just put them under the table. And I think that's what we found with EOS, was that it all came into the light, right? And I think the scale of it also like increased a lot. But so yeah, I think that the issue is that when you try and write some of these fairly natural human motivations out of the equation, they are still there, but they just come back and they just are hidden. But I mean, I'm interested to see. I don't know. I could be wrong. And as I say, I think a diversity of constructs is probably the optimal.
And that's what I say is I'm curious to see how that works, because like I say, you all and how David was kind of thinking about, and you don't have to obviously go into all of it. I mean, I know you're brainstorming and thinking of things, but that was the first thing that popped into mind is I, like yourself, celebrate. No, I mean, have a project, come use it as a platform, gain user engagement. If it's financially viable for you not to have to, make money off of it, and you consider that, your gains elsewhere, great. But what that's going to mean is that you now have, as a project, and I'll use the monkeys because I mean, they're great guys. And, we're one of the first to really kind of impact. Holy cow. I don't think, I can't speak for them, but I don't think they really cared so much about the governance of NERI. They more just, I think, maybe had some land there and saw it was, lesser populated and just said, hey, I'm going to pick there. Well, now they are probably the single most influential governing influencer, on NERI, because their project, and again, they're not looking at it as a money revenue. They're more looking at the other benefits from it. So there's going to be people that whoever's running on NERI would probably reach out to the monkeys and say, hey, can you throw some support our way? Or I'll be happy to, do something special. And how do you even prevent that, knowing the framework, I think, wants to support that inadvertently,
Well, I want to clarify that I don't want to write out anything. Absolutely not. I want to reduce the impact of obvious imbalanced attack vectors. The biggest one I see as the vote buying, by bringing everyone on equal terms to the table. So that is a viable strategy, of course, to buy votes, and everyone who likes to do that can do that. I just want to create an environment where it is not like the overpowered thing to do and everyone just does that, right? Because it's like nothing else to do. So I want to create an environment where if some people have other ideas, they can do that and come to the table and just discuss how can we work together. So like in the end, so I want to create an environment where the best things will work together and create a synergy spiral and best outcome is created. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm not going to write this out. Like, I don't know all the technology stuff and what kind of environment will be optimal. So I'm just looking to put an abstraction layer on top of that to integrate the social, emotional, spiritual, intellectual resources of all the groups coming together and extract the most value of all of that into the process. So that's basically what I'm looking for, so that not only the people with blockchain knowledge and financial knowledge have the upper hand, but to have like all forms of intelligence, well, that are related to this at least, are able to contribute to this. So that's like, maybe sounds a bit big words-ish, but yeah, that's, I have no idea how I'm going to do it, but it's like what I would like to do if I was free to do it, right?
Well,
No,
like
I think
say,
we're saying the same thing actually then, because it sounds like what we're both saying is that we want to have the room for different types of contribution. And you're right that that kind of pure yield extraction or that kind of highly rent seeking mode can quite quickly dominate the other modes. So I think that is a very worthwhile investigation. How do you allow these things to coexist, or how do you create? If you don't allow them to coexist, all you can do is put a new model in front of people and hope that it gains traction. I mean, that's the kind of non-coercive and the sort of the way that we have designed it. So I hope that I really think that would be a really great way for one of the planets, for example, to work, or even more than that.
yeah, like I say, and of course, David, I mean, don't get me wrong. I love the ideas. I strive off of, the creative juices or whatever, but that was kind of one of the first things that popped into my head was that, yeah, I mean, it's one of the benefits of the project. It's a framework, you get eyes on us, we get eyes on you, everybody's, mutually beneficial from that side. But one of the inadvertent effects is going to be, they are a very influential project throughout the system. So I'm curious how to keep that from impacting things when you say, you want to put everybody on an even keel. So anyway,
Well,
excited to
if
see
they
how
are smart, I think if the big players are smart, they will realize that the most profitable thing is happy people. And that means, like, as a big player, they can make the most profit of happy people. And so if they really are smart and not just big, they will strive to work together with everyone, so everyone is the maximum amount of happy. And they will look for people and systems who can enable that. So that's just like how I'm looking at it. Like, I know happy people are the most profitable in things you can ever have. And it's becoming apparent even for big money now. Right, we're entering the time and the era of where this is becoming apparent, that it just is more profitable to have happy people than to have exploited people, right? And so that's just next step.
Back to these, because in the world of IT, I get picked on a lot of times about how, the work environments for IT companies are typically a little more fun than most people are maybe used to, or oh, you get a relaxed room. Oh, you have a Starbucks in your lobby or something like that, right? I mean, but yeah, like you say, is people have realized that when they're happier, you get a better return, even if it's not straight financial, so to say.
Yeah, that could be the case. Or maybe people are more productive when they're scared. I don't know.
Again, there's two different
No, I'm sure that's not true. I'm only kidding.
And I mean, how about this? Different personalities are that. I mean,
that's possibly also true. Yeah.
I'm dealing with that right now, is that I'm trying to find minions and whatnot. You've got different, some need to be, a little more thump. And, some people, and I probably am more.
Yeah, it's true, actually.
That don't ask me, don't micromanage me, you micromanage me, whatever. So it's the different personalities and they react differently, Some people are financial. I always told my boss, I was like, look, don't hang the Twinkie in front of me because I'm not going to work any harder. I'm a hard worker. But when you detriment me from something I can't control, that is more impactful to me. And I'm maybe unique in that, but that it was not a very, I'd rather not get rewarded for doing extra and not get detrimented for, not doing something I couldn't do. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, but the point is the different personalities, I definitely think will come into play as to what's impactful and what's not.
Well, actually, I think that's exactly the point. Like Michael, what you just brought up, that's exactly the point. What I'm looking at is creating an environment where everyone is safe to communicate their needs, and where the group will work together to find the best possible, and even with proposals. Like this is like all abstract what I'm talking about. What I have in mind is like a really efficient process. But it's like that's like the next. I don't want to spend the time here, but right. But it's the point is what you just said. It's like everyone has different needs, and when they are met, they are happy, or whatever we call that. They are at their best, right? When they have these needs met, and they are very all over the place for different people, and so it would be like the most logical thing to do to identify those and make sure those are met for everyone, and make sure they don't interfere with each other. So, and if we can do that in any group, then we have the most efficiency from the like value extracted from the group to speak in those terms, right? And so that's kind of what I'm looking to do to keep it in these very precise terms.
Yeah, and the reason I laugh is I'm like, hey, when you get that perfectly figured out, and I mean, I would love to introduce you to about 15 different DPoS chains for you to look, guys. This is how y'all can govern and not have, whatever. Because I mean, it's hard. DACs, even in general, like you say, is just when you start getting everybody's opinion out there, and this structure doesn't properly represent some people, this doesn't the others. Like Yates was talking about, is y'all had to develop a game that was okay with people having hundreds of thousands of trillium, as well as somebody coming in with a shovel, and to provide that balance between not being boring for the big boys and impossible for the little boys or girls, so same type of thing with the governance is, the balancing and finding, I don't know, a sweet spot in between.
Yeah, someone's just sent me the book of Dan Larimer with the more equal element animals. So I'm just diving into what is the challenges the space is working on, because I'm so new in this actual DAC space, but I'm very interested, like what has already been solved, what is still looking for a solution, and how it can interface with the other governance, like the offline and governance and in the industry being used stuff. So I'm just like getting into that stuff.
I'd be curious. Like I say, my feeble-minded opinion would probably be, like Kosoro had said, is that in the long run, almost everything boils down to the value add, and I mean that value add may be the warm and fuzzies you get from Kumbaya, but why you do what you do is because you feel like you're getting a value from it. So, like I say, I'm curious as to how that just naturally tends to lead to, financial reasons. But anyway, that's the problem we run into on all of them, on the BP voting, on, maybe even these election campaigns in the first spot, because David hadn't had the chance to change things yet, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing about that is that luckily there's a rising tide going on, especially with NFTs and so on. So that hopefully adds a little bit of, lubrication to the whole thing and allows people to try different things. And, if something doesn't go well, then you can try something else. I think it's been a bit different on some other chains that have been kind of in what has appeared basically terminal decline. And then the ability to sort of correct whilst in flight is a little bit impaired then. Luckily, we seem to be in a different phase of this.
Yeah, well, and it's always an evolving, the governance, any governance, I guess, in general, but especially, in the blockchain world. I mean, hell, next month, it's a whole nother world.
The good thing is we get 6 choices. We get 6 chances to experiment, whereas most chains only get 1.
Correct, and that's why I say is
to one certain way of doing things, whereas we can have 6 different ways of doing things, and if one goes wrong, we'll just chuck it and we'll get a new planet.
Well, and that's what I mean. How about this? You don't even, because you have multiple, and because it's built into the game. It's exciting that I don't even think you have to chunk it. The miners will chunk it. You know what I mean? Is that if it doesn't work, it doesn't cripple it may hurt that planet. And guess what? As soon as they stop getting Trillium and stop, the miners will no longer go there. The stakers will no longer go there. The other 5 will step in, and maybe that DAO will learn its lesson and change its ways. But it's not a single entity that if it doesn't work, you go into a paralysis. It's actually, try it out, see what you got. If you don't like this, go see David. David's got some coolness over on Magor going on, So the
if he produces something really good, then in theory, everybody should flock to it. So it should become the biggest planet and the most staked planet.
And then immediately behind that, just like human nature, okay, well, if that's what succeeds, Neri will be like, done, let's do it, right? And then balance it out. I mean, imitation is the best form of flattery, but
yeah.
Question, what's the term for representatives? A week. So the voting is, at least that's the default configuration. So the voting is continuous. So every time someone votes, you can see that in any given time, at least I think.
Really? So I was going to ask you that, what is the default term limit on the council members?
Yeah, 1 week. So the call, the votes are tallied once per week.
Can the council members then change the term, by a supermajority vote, I'm guessing?
Yeah, they can.
Cool.
Yeah, that's one of the configuration parameters of the DAO itself.
Well, like I say, I'm curious how that'll work, because I guess with only 5, it won't be that bad. But I've noticed, like on some of the other DACs, where you've constantly got that floating, that number 4 and number 5 slot, where they're constantly bouncing in and out. It can make it difficult when you talk about herding the cats for 3 or 5 or whatever. That the more frequent the re-elections, the more difficult, even just to know, am I elected or not? I run into that, is that, does my vote count today or does it not?
It kind of cuts both ways, right? Because you don't want it to be so infrequent that, or you don't want it to, you don't want things to necessarily be in place for too long, because the voter feedback mechanism needs to be fairly liquid and immediate.
Mm-hmm.
And then that needs to be balanced out with just the practical kind of thing of, as you say, just knowing
to get done.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I say, I'm curious, and of course it'll work itself out. I mean, that's how DAOs really kind of do, is that, well, I don't know, here's a framework, y'all figure it out, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so there are certain things that could be difficult to sort of self-regulate out of, I guess. Which is, I think, what Michael was mentioning around, if something really goes wrong, it's possible for that planet no longer to be considered viable. But under the ordinary course of what was happening, that wouldn't be the case. So for example, if a custodian term was extended to a really long time, then we might say that wasn't kind of allowing voters to express.
Yeah.
I mean, these are liquid, right? I mean, the voters could say, like, okay, let's have a term of 1 day, and it would probably not work out, and it would get changed, and there could be a proposal. Let's say, okay, this is too much hassle. Let's do 4 weeks terms, and it could be voted upon. So, I mean, I think, to me, it sounds like these are starting parameters that will be evolved, right?
Yeah.
Because like a council also needs some time to get into a working mode, but I expect this to be to evolve basically towards something that works in that environment. And at the start, it will be huge experimentation, and maybe it will be blood and bones, because falling down and getting up again. Maybe.
But that's how you learn. I mean, that's the And that, I mean, it's an evolution. That's the whole point. A framework, try it out, you know. And that's why I say the competition of the DAOs, I think will really help kind of inspire that. Is that, you know, it gives you a choice. Most DACs, you know, I mean, you either like what EOS DAC was doing or you don't participate, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
there
true.
was no other option in theory. I mean, just as an example.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that that's exactly the power of this, is the fact that there's more than one.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
And I mean, I
actually,
guess that kind of thing around, like, it's an interesting point about, like, would the custodians prefer longer terms? Probably, but the voters might prefer shorter terms to ensure that they could get a council out if necessary. So yeah, there will be a balance between those two things. And I imagine bigger planets might prefer shorter council terms because there's more value in them, and you need to, just for security, you know, you need to have the ability to vote a council out. But maybe a smaller planet where there was less value tied up in it, the voters might say, yeah, have a longer term strategic thing. I mean, I just added, you know, one point is that even like, so with the EOS we had week-long terms, but actually the custodians didn't change all that much week by week, although they did over time. The board did evolve.
yeah. So you found the week was, you know, a nice little balance in between, and I guess it's one good thing to know. There's a DAC of the Federation, so to say, I'll call it that still has the ability to protect all the other players and the gameplay overall. Is that if those slimy cabal folk really took something and juiced the system to where it was just negatively impacting or gaming it, that there is still, and it's not Yates individually, so to say, you know, it's, I will call it a DAC above it, you know, the DeCoco crew or whatever. But that there is still that saving grace of, yo, you're letting the factions go to town and whatever, but you know, you don't want somebody else to go crazy and truly detrimentally impact the game. Make your choice how you want. But if, I don't know, I'm just trying to think of, you know, worst case scenario is that once you start opening up the world, you know, or like you talk about, you get yourself into a downward spiral of, yeah, you'll never get out of it, right? You locked yourself out of your permissions. You made 150 delegates, and now you can't get
Yeah.
you can't undo it because you can't get enough people to get it before the MSIG expires, right, Yates? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we control the code still, so we can always update the code to kind of, yeah, I mean, if something like that happened where someone changed it to a silly amount and then couldn't get quorum for anything, we could always change the code and then help them out and get it fixed.
correct. Step in and kind of right the ship, as opposed, not rule with an iron fist, but I think, you know, I think that's interesting to at least know, or at least me as a game player, I'd like to know that, wait, you're going to let EOS USA and these nerds go to town? Well, no. I mean, there's still a little bit of protection, you know, from the overall game.
Yeah, I mean, there's some things you can't do, like some things that are controlled by the code, which we control. Like you can't print more of your token, for example.
At least not the normal way, but that doesn't stop somebody from trying to.
You could print another token, you could create another secondary planet token, but you couldn't create new ones which could then be unstaked for Trillium.
Yeah. And you know what makes me think about that is, you know, we've run into this on other chains, is that people assume that token, you know, if it's a CAV token, it's the CAV token. Well, no, you can have, you know, as much. So I'm curious to see, you know, as people start to integrate with these tokens, you know, it's on the burden of the devs to, you know, do those extra checks to keep those malicious actors from being able to go in and skew. Like David's voting portal, say he spins up his voting portal and does it, you know, he needs to definitely have those checks, because I do think that eventually the bad actors, and I'll pick on us, you know, but that
You're quite bad.
It's amazing how evil people can be, and they're not even. You know, I mean, it's a game half the time to IT nerds, but anyway, that's what I'm curious to see where all that goes.
Well, for like an important factor against system being gamed is, like, if you think about real world politics, right? The biggest problem is the gap in communication between the governing body and the being governed population, right? There's no communication and no direct line of communication, and it is pretty much intentional, so as we all know. And so if you imagine there was, like, just to give this example, if we had a planetary council and there was one councilman as a representative of a voter body, right? That would be a huge difference. It wouldn't just be this, yeah, you can vote on this and we can game you by writing the proposals in a way that you will have no real way of influencing, even if you vote, because we are like we are up here, right? But if there's an actual representative of the voters sitting on that council, that would make a huge difference. And that is basically this double linked circle structure that I want to try out, because it's systematically designed in a way that you cannot game it this way. You cannot escape into this ivory tower and rule with the iron fist and pretend you are doing it all for the people, because out of the understanding that this is not sustainable in the long way. So why? So just don't even do it in the first place, right? Just do everything to prevent that kind of attack vector. So I would like, even if I get voted out, right? If I don't get voted into a council, what I would just do is I would create a voter body to collect interests and stakes and stakeholders. What are things that people want to vote for and stuff like that. So I just like to see this kind of circle structure with representatives. So there's not this huge gap between the governing and the governed, but there's an actual really tight interface and a very strong flow of feedback in both directions, because I think that is exactly the only reason that you even become evil, in that you are disconnected. So you don't really get to feel the consequences on your actions on the other end, right? But if you get direct feedback of what it does that you did to the other person, and if it has bad consequences, you just don't do it, right? Because it feels like you're doing something bad to yourself. But if you have that disconnect and you don't see that, right, you can do anything and you can tell yourself you did something good, right? We all know this, like in the internet, people are assholes because they usually don't see the consequences on their actions, like the anonymous troll. But it's different if someone is face to face. You are faced with the consequences of your actions, and I see that in governance, and I see that with the methods I used offline. Like if you have this kind of direct feedback mechanisms built in, the behavior of people is a lot different.
Makes sense. Like I say, I'm excited to see kind of how it comes to fruition, and I'd vote for you. I don't know if I'll have any tokens on the planet that you'll be on, but like I say, I'm curious to see different ideas get put into place versus just the normal staking reward mechanism. So
yeah, I'm very excited to see what you come up with as well. And if you need any help to integrate it, let me know, and we can definitely get it working. It's going to take a lot of code, though. I hope you're able to code, or you know somebody who is.
I was about to say, I don't know if anybody. There's very many people that code like you, Yates. Myself definitely included in that.
Well, you could write your own code if you had your own code separately, which was able to make these decisions and then make an action on behalf of it. We could just elect your code as the only council member of a planet. So we could effectively just put your code in control of that planet.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it would work. You wouldn't change the code that we're using, but you would just elect that code to be running it. And you could do even interesting things like have 2 or 3 different smart contracts running a planet.
Would that mean that the governance of the planet was officially run by AI, when a smart contract is the only custodian of a planet, that the robots have officially taken over?
It's an interesting concept. It wouldn't be AI, but it would be
What's AI? I mean, AI is what you program, right? I mean, it is what it is. So is it intelligent? Is it
Reached
anyway?
out to the
Those are
MIT.
days when we have AI actually running the software. That would be cool.
Robotron for president.
Exactly.
I've already reached out to the MIT Media Lab to ask about that.
You're
Part
funny.
of my plans. Trust me, I don't want to have to vote anymore. Which reminds me, we are about to transition over to the DAC Factory community feedback discussion. So I thank you all for this amazing conversation on governance. I'm just going to take a moment here and end this stream and start the new one, if you don't mind.